when it seems important and I'm not sure, that's like the perfect moment for huge flare up and defensiveness.
Yeah.
And I think we got to be ready to catch ourselves on those of like, why is this coming up so hot in me? Is actually this something that I care a ton about, but I'm actually not that confident?
Yes. And where I see this hit for moms of young kids is everything is a bit scary.
Yeah.
So you bring about a topic, I'm going to talk about vaccines for a second. You bring about that topic, all parties are scared. If we could get to a point where we, with our real people, go, you know what? I'm scared of this. And then the other person goes, I'm scared too.
Yeah.
And then guess what you have? Something in common.
Yeah.
I love my kids and I am scared. Well, Layne, great to see you.
Hi, Jess.
Guys, it's so good to be back with you for another episode. Hi, my name is Jessica Hover. My friends call me Jess.
I'm Layne Dealing-Cherlant, and this is Very Good Enough, a podcast from Very Good Mothers Club.
And today we're going to be talking about something that has come up recently, and I think there's going to be more of it, honestly. Election year. Yeah, basically what I want to bring to Layne and have a conversation about is how do you maintain relationship with people when you parent differently or see the world differently or come from different worldviews. Is that the same as saying the world differently? I'm thinking more like religion, politics, your thoughts on every polarizing topic, anything that makes people really rowdy in a Facebook group. You get into a parenting Facebook group, like what's going to set people off, right? What would those be? Like co-sleeping, vaccinations, like breastfeeding. Thank you. Anything that has the potential to divide people and on social media makes you feel like you can only be divided, that there is no way to have a relationship with somebody who doesn't entirely agree with the way you see the world. And I very strongly believe that if you're two healthy individuals and you have enough in common, you can maintain relationship. That doesn't mean it's not complicated. And you don't, I think it is very safe and comforting to have relationships with people who do share most of your beliefs on most things. I think that is really important. Healthy, it makes you feel at home.
Well, that's the basis for a lot of the way that we build communities. We look for people who have shared values, who want to live a similar kind of life, and like that we resonate with in really important ways. That's normal and reasonable and totally fine.
Exactly. So what came up recently multiple times is two women, they're both moms, they have a lot in common, they really like each other, and then they find out that the other woman either believes this thing about this thing or does this thing with her child that the other mom would never do. And what was brought to me multiple times about multiple topics was, what do I do? Like, can I maintain friendship with her? Because my instinct was to be like, oh no, I don't know if we can move forward in relationship. But even the woman bringing this to me is like, I don't know where I got that. It could actually be that we spend so much of our time on social media, especially post-pandemic. During the pandemic, that was like the way of maintaining connection was in front of a screen, right? And so now to be back in real life, sitting with real friends, having real conversations, you are very likely going to find out that these people you love so much believe different things, or you're just going to get older and decide that what you thought was true for much of your life, you now no longer think is true. And how do you maintain relationships with family or friends that still holds to everything that you once thought was true about the world? And now you're over here being like, I still love you and you still love me. And I know that. But for some reason, it almost feels like we can't have a relationship anymore. And I come from a family that has very different beliefs about the world just within our own unit. So divorced parents, people see things differently. They're going to be voting for different candidates. Like there's going to be a lot about their styles of life that are different from each other. And as the child going from one home to the other home, going from one circle of people to another circle, I kind of without realizing it, had to develop some skills to be like, I love you, I like you, I want to be with you. So over here, we're going to do stuff like this. And over here, we're going to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I worked for an international nonprofit. You get people from all these different countries and cultures, and they too see the world very differently and think they're right.
Yeah.
We all think we're right based on the information we have about the world. And so, yeah, it is a big question. How do you stay connected with people who see things differently from you? And are there any tools that we could share with our friends to do this? And I wanted to bring it to Layne because, well, for one, because this isn't actually a motherhood issue.
Right.
Even though I'm speaking on the context of like, what if so-and-so doesn't give their kids sugar and you do? Or what if they don't do screen time and you do? Or the vaccination piece, like that can put a wedge between moms or parents. But you see this and you're not a mom yet or potentially ever. You see this in your family relationships and your friendships, right? Like this is a human thing.
Yes, it's a human thing. And it's a very American thing at the moment. This is a thing that has been building in American culture and American media really significantly over the last 15-ish years and then super accelerated in the last 8 or so.
Okay.
But it's also there's a global struggle with this right now because of the way that information moves, having a lot to do with social media and with algorithms that are designed to show you more of what you want as kind of an unintended consequence. The intended consequence was stay on the app. The unintended consequence has become that actually people with whom I used to be really unified in a worldview, we have now separately from one another been receiving such different information that when we sit down to talk, they're actually living in a reality that appears different from my reality, where like they will say a thing and I'm like, that thing isn't real. That event did not occur. And they're like, yes, it did though.
Whoa. We did something
neither
yesterday.
of us was there.
Yesterday, Becca and I were watching the same video on our Instagram and we go to the comments because we both were like, whoa, I wonder what people are saying about this. And our comments were entirely different.
Oh, it reordered them for you?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it did it based on what it thought we would each believe about the video and whose side. You could tell like Instagram thought I would be on one side of this dilemma that was in the video and she would be on the other, which the irony is like we were both pretty much on the same side. So I'm not really sure what happened. But that's crazy.
Yeah.
You're watching stuff and you think like, oh, well, I'm doing my research. I'm doing my TikTok research. And then you find out that everybody's getting their own ideas like validated, reinforced. Like, yeah, you're right. And the person sitting on the bench next to you on their phone is having the same experience and you guys could be believing entirely different things about how to raise your kids, how to have a family, where you should be. I don't know.
But our information gets so reinforced over and over that what happens is that it feels obvious to us. So we sit over here being like, but it's so obvious that X person is a monster. How could anyone support such a terrifying monster?
Right.
Fill in whomever appears to be a monster from where you're looking.
Totally.
It probably is different than the other person's monster. And yet it feels so obvious.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting, we've already said several things that I wish I had an actual board to like put a pin in.
Sure.
But this topic feels really poignant and interesting to me as a person who has 100% like changed worldviews over the course of my 20s. I went from a very, very defined worldview and came to feel like, oh, I actually think that almost all of that is no.
It's not what you thought, You were so sure of it. She has tattoos about the stuff she believed, right? I mean, that's assurance.
Yes, couldn't have been. Couldn't have been more sure. Didn't need faith because I knew. And I mean that in a faith sense, but I also mean that in a geopolitical sense. Like everything was just like really super clear. And went through a real transition. It's very, very frightening to change your mind about stuff. And especially to like replace the floor on the way that you see the world. It's very destabilizing. So I want to start, I think that's an important piece to just have in the conversation is how genuinely scary it is. It's actually like really unsafe. And when we talk about my periods of unwellness, this was what was happened. This was sort of the overarching context for that most intense period, was being like, everything's changing and I don't know where to stand. And I don't know how to think anymore because I thought so surely, and how do I trust myself? Like, it's really destabilizing to change your mind. So let's just like put a little bit of a, let's just put that as a piece on the table when you're either thinking about yourself and hearing information from someone who you're like, oh, that's not my worldview, or when you're wanting to influence someone else's worldview, let's just like start with a very clear understanding of what that really, it's costly to change your worldview. It's very frightening and the implications are big.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and now have pieced together a new worldview that has a lot more space in it and is a little patchy in some areas, but a lot of things are getting a lot more clear. So just as a person who like has done that journey, I don't have a ton of credentials in my life, but that's a thing that I think is an important feature of like, I've actually done a whole arc here and can really speak to what it means to totally change.
And do you still have relationship with people? It sounds like your entire family still is where you once were, or most of your family, right? Are you able to maintain relationship? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's trickier on my end because I have all the information about how different our relationship is and they don't. And so part of what is tricky even is like knowing how to loop them in on the fact that we are no longer speaking the same language. We do not have this like shared viewpoint as we look out our eyeballs. Like we look at things really differently. So that's tricky. There's like a sticky space in even how do I tell people that how do I let this person who's speaking as though their thoughts are obvious? When do I stop them to tell them that I don't think that's obvious? And in fact, I think it's not real. And am I lying to people if I don't? Like, do you just let them carry on? A lot of that has to do with like the proximity of closeness.
Yeah, like how frequently are you going to see them or talk to them?
Which of my aunts am I going to be seeing a lot? And they really are going to want to talk about this? And which of them are just like passing by and saying a comment? I don't want to be stopping everyone at every party to say, I just want to let you know, I don't believe that I'm neither a Christian nor a Republican.
Yeah.
We don't believe the same things about women, like at all, like really at all.
Sure.
I actually think what you're doing is so damaging. Just as a person who like trained up through your system and have had to undo like your handiwork, person who thinks you love me. And I think you do, but like actually like, and this is a lot of people, part of, just for context, like part of my history is that my family is also in charge of the church where I grew up, and that church was my whole culture and context. Like I went to that church's school, like my life was pretty enclosed. It encompassed maybe 3,000 people in total in like a 10-mile radius. You know, like it was.
So everyone in your life was either part of your church, your family, or your school, which was also part of your church, family, and school?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm trying to think if there were people in my neighborhood. I casually knew neighbors, but like those were not
but you
close
didn't, like,
people.
go to sleepovers with families that had different belief systems or anything?
No.
Wow.
I rarely met people who had a different belief system.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
I have a couple of aunts who were like holding down their own corner within this family who's otherwise fairly unified. I mean, they're all thoughtful and intelligent and interesting people, and they all have their own flavors of religion and of politics and family life. And, you know, I don't want to paint everybody as like a monolith.
Sure.
But
does the church and school and community still exist today?
Yeah.
What?
Absolutely.
I need to do some Googling, folks.
Absolutely.
What? Okay.
Yes.
All right. That'll be for after.
But also not to paint them as like this tiny little cult. Like it's a pretty large church. It's it's people. But
did you say cult?
It's not a cult.
Okay.
It's people. It's like enough people.
Yeah.
There's a way to tell this story where it sounds like I grew up in a tiny little closed community where everybody wore skirts. It's also
I wasn't going to
use
the word
It's also not that.
And then when I thought you did, I was like, wait.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so it's not.
I want to set some wide parameters
that's
around
good.
what I'm talking about.
That's really good.
It's over here kind of like this. It's also not that.
Yeah, cool.
But my
very
direct family members are like the leaders of that community. So like my family culture in the extended family sense very much dictated the community culture that I grew up in.
Are you a pastor's kid?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sure I knew that, but to identify you like this right now.
Yeah, that's funny. It's a really key feature of the way that I think about myself.
But
very,
people have
very
been
much so.
Not a kid, but that's just what they call them, if you know. They'll be like, I'm a PK. And you're like, oh.
Yeah. I've never abbreviated in my whole goddamn life. But they do call it that.
They do.
Absolutely do.
And I wasn't even raised like that.
Yeah, and it's a totally important identity. It's like being tiny famous in a tiny circle, but also there's a lot to protect.
Okay.
Like reputation-wise and a lot to uphold. Like I went to that school because the senior pastor of the church was like, no, we cannot have staff kids not going to our school. You know, like there's
it's
a
all
lot of
part
my
of
life was like really structured that way, dictated that way. Yeah, my dad was the children's pastor at that church for like 25 years.
Whoa.
My uncle is the head pastor of that church, and his wife, who is my dad's sister, is in charge of the women's ministry. They've just passed the baton to my cousin, who was
But you and your siblings, I met her brothers. They live in New York.
I and my siblings are amongst the heathen.
Yeah.
Which is what it felt like to be making this announcement to family members. To
okay,
just,
this
like,
is such an important piece. Is like you're a heathen to one group of people, but to another group of people, you fit right in and you find yourself at home, and people are like, oh my gosh, I know. I've either been there or your new way of thinking makes perfect sense. And so to one group you'll be in. And to another group, you'll be out. And what we're trying to figure out is it possible to maintain relationships across these really intense, identities of heathen and like hero?
Absolutely. And
heathen
the
and
last
hero.
100 days of an election is a timely time to be talking about this. Not that we're going to talk about the election.
Yeah, we're not.
Just putting a lot of context.
But
we're not.
Yeah.
We're putting context around it. And yes, all that, perhaps a little bit of an overshare of context there to say this is a really pertinent and present issue in my life right now because I have been trying to go back down to San Diego more frequently, especially like moving to LA was like part of the impetus of that was like, oh, I could do day trips to see my family. It wouldn't have to be such a whole thing. Like maybe it would be a lot easier, and it has been, to reconnect and go down there and be an adult without having to like sleep in my house or like, I don't know, it just costs less.
Yeah. Do you ever get into like meaningful debate type conversations? Because you're very smart and I know your family is as well. You couldn't do it. It would not go well.
I have not so far. I have not felt confident.
Okay.
I have bailed dramatically. It has caused a collapse inside when stuff comes up where I'm like, oh, I think because it's this thing of like, I think this person that I love so much is about to say a bunch of stuff I think is really harmful, and I cannot navigate it. So I have literally like quietly fled tables in the last couple of years. I think we're just about at a point where I've increased the frequency of seeing them so much, and my own confidence in who I am and in what I think, and my maturity to just let them be all the things. No, they probably do love me, even though that thing they taught me, I feel, harmed me a lot, but like, and they're still doing it. And do I have to be a defender of the other? Like, I think I'm coming into a calm enough place where I could start to really open these conversations up a lot more. Mostly it's been just like, you know how the White House will like leak information that it wants the press to know, but they can't actually make a statement? I've been like leaking information about myself
via podcast. I've been leaking to my parents.
To safer family members. So that they will hopefully just disseminate my information to the others who will be sad. But I have had some conversations, again, not really like bandying ideas back and forth, but expressing my own story a little bit. I've had a couple of really positive ones with people who, obviously we're adults, but like I think of them as the adults. With some of those adults who are saddened, but actually like handled it in a way that I was like, oh my gosh, you didn't try to change me or stop that or make that not, oh, interesting. So all to say, I am feeling some hope through the end of this summer. I've been going down there a lot. My grandmother passed away recently, so I've been going down a bunch. I'm going down again in a couple of weeks. And just starting to like really feel like I have my relationship, my adult versions of these relationships a little more established. But I do think that opens the window for me being more real, which is going to bring up more stuff.
Yes, because it's that investment into like the trust between you guys. And there is something too, like you're an adult, but some people in your life you're still going to view as the adult because they are more grown than you, and for so much of life they were an authority of some kind. So I think that is a piece of it, is building into the trust so that when you share something, it's easier to feel like we're on the same page. We don't see things the same way at all, but there's enough holding us both together that we can like have a conversation and not seeing things the same as the other person, and still being like, but I love you. We can move forward. Like, this is okay. Thanks for doing that with me. But it takes a lot. And you also need the right moment, because there are so many variables. If you guys are tired, if you guys are stressed, if it is right before our periods, if there's anything that's going to send us from, I feel safe sharing my feelings with you, even though I know you don't see things like I do, send us from that to, I no longer feel safe and I want to shut down and I actually want space from you and I don't want to be with you because you don't see me. That can happen very quickly about things that feel ginormous. And especially when you're coming down to like faith. So some of these people, they're going, but Layne, eternity. And you're like, but family today. Like, I'm here just trying to let you in on what I think and feel and who I am today. For them, it is so massive. And so, so it's finding the right time to be like, hey, I know this might be intense for you. Also very intense for me. Would love to be able to talk about this. The trust, it's a big deal.
The trust is a really big deal because it has a huge effect on how defensive we are or are not going to be. Part of keeping this family analogy going for one more moment, part of what has made it not possible for me to really be sharing ideas back and forth with my family members has been that I have felt the need to defend myself. I have felt not safe in those spaces, especially in the areas where I had any kind of ambiguity or I actually wasn't that confident. Places where I didn't know if I had really filled out a lot of information or really fleshed out what my new belief is, whether that's like belief about the world or belief about God or what, but like, I don't know what my new position is, but it feels important. And around that kind of stuff, we're really defensive. Things that we have a ton of information about, that we feel really calm about, that our views are clear and we're actually quite confident, those tend to be spaces where actually we could get into conflict with people without that freak out coming up. But like, when it seems important and I'm not sure, that's like the perfect moment for huge flare up and defensiveness. And I think we got to be ready to catch ourselves on those of like, why is this coming up so hot in me? Is actually this something that I care a ton about, but I'm actually not that confident?
Yes. And where I see this hit for moms of young kids is everything is a bit scary. So you bring about a topic, I'm going to talk about vaccines for a second. You bring about that topic, all parties are scared. The cool
all
thing—
parties are scared enough that this is the only thing I have a moratorium about talking on the internet about. I will not ever speak with you, internet, about vaccines. It's like the one thing that I'm like, we can't be chill about this together. And it doesn't actually matter which side of it I'm on. Live your lives, and we're not talking about it.
But at least if we could get to a point where we, with our real people, go, you know what? I'm scared of this. And then the other person goes, I'm scared too. And then guess what you have? Something in common. I love my kids and I am scared. And it's like, okay, well, based on the information I have, this is a choice I made. Oh, really? I learned this, so I made this choice. Oh, interesting. Where did you learn that? Because we have enough in common, love for our kids. We are afraid and we're trying to get information. We have so many things in common. And then we could still walk away going, so I'm going to do it like this. Like, okay, I'm going to do it like that. Cool. Thanks for talking to me about it. I feel like now something's open to where I can see you and you're not the enemy of my beliefs. You're not even the enemy of my child. You are another scared, smart woman trying to raise her kid well. And when it comes to these things in our life that we're like, I don't know what I believe about God, marriage, families, politics, like these major things, if we can get down to like, you know, I'm actually kind of scared of getting this wrong. Oh, you are? Me too. Whoa, to be a human, like to be vulnerable and humble, crazy, right? And then it's like, well, I don't want my kids growing up in a world like this. Oh my gosh, I see that. I actually have been really thinking about this. I don't want my kids growing up in a world like this. Like, oh, I see that. Thanks for talking to me about that. And then you can leave and not agree with each other, but be like, that was really special. I got to see a glimpse into that person's heart. I already knew knew I liked them for like these other, we watch the same shows. We think the same guy's funny.
Right.
And we do this very differently. Maybe she sleeps with her kids and I do separate rooms. And like, it's weird what can make you feel like you're doing parenting wrong or you're doing life wrong or womanhood wrong. Like there's just so much here. But if we can just be like, I'm just a little nervous. I just really want to get this right. And then the other person's like, yeah, same. Oh, wow, cool. We have so many places we can go with this conversation. And even about something like politics, it's like, well, here's the stuff I really don't like. Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't even know all of that. Here's the stuff I really don't like. Oh, whoa, I could see that. This is a meaningful conversation. Thanks for doing this with me. The internet kind of had me feeling like if I lean this way and you lean that way, it's because we have nothing in common.
Right.
A woman recently...
It's because we're enemies.
Yes, exactly. A woman recently said to me, it was so weird. I was in this group. It was AA, actually. I was in AA and this woman was there and I loved her. I loved the way she talked. I loved her style. Everything about her was awesome. But then she told me who she would be voting for. And I wanted to never speak to her again. And she said, I felt it in me of like, what? I just really liked this person. How could she? And then, so she's coming to me and she's like, what would you do about this? And I said, what if you, because you like her so much and because she seems so great, what if you just tried to understand her? Like, so what is it about this person? I would love to know because actually I really don't care for this person, but I would love to know, what are you thinking about this person? And it doesn't mean you'll agree. And it doesn't even mean this is going to be your best friend or something. But if you liked so much about them, then there's probably something interesting going on the other side. And for this one woman I'm speaking to, she was really passionate about one particular topic. But she had no idea if this woman even thought about that topic, cared about it. And she's like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, oh, well, just ask her questions. Like, if she's so fun, ask her what she thinks about these things. And it's okay if it feels a little awkward because we kind of don't know we're allowed to. Like, if we bring it up, is it going to end in conflict? Not unless we make it a conflict. Like it could just be, oh, that's really interesting. Or like, this is a really hard conversation for me to have. I don't usually have these conversations. But either way, thanks for talking to me about it. I really like your personality. I love your energy. It's so fun. And then you leave and you're like, okay, cool. That wasn't my person for most things. But when I go to AA, I'll most likely have nice conversations as long as we avoid whatever the thing is that causes a rift or something, you know, if you can't have the conversation. Question, did you by chance listen to the podcast, The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling?
I sure did.
I felt like they, in that podcast, did a really good job of like demonstrating what we're talking about. Is like going in and being like, okay, we might not see all of these topics the same way, but can you help me understand why you feel so comfortable saying the things you said? And then the woman who was doing it.
So this woman is really important. Her name is something that I don't remember, and yet she's so important to me. So I think her name is Megan, but she grew up in the Westboro Baptist Church, which is, I'm going to just go ahead and state my opinion, a hate group that is a religious organization that protests the funeral of gay people and soldiers.
Yeah, you might have seen them on TV or something.
They're incredibly aggressive and just so gnarly, gnarly. Sometimes I find it really helpful, or on my journey, I have found it really helpful to look at people who have lived a way more extreme example of something that I've gone through in a minor way, because it makes the picture so clear and big.
Sure.
So my life was not at all like this woman's life, but in terms of like exiting from a worldview that you no longer agree with and finding a new way to exist in the world, I have found her to be a really interesting person to watch and to talk to. She got into dialogues with people on Twitter, maybe like 15, 20 years ago when it was early, and you could have like real conversations back and forth. Her goal being to convince people of her gnarly worldview, and their goal being to understand how a person could think these things that seemed so crazy to them. And she eventually like was introduced to new ideas and to the kinds of people that she was vilifying at that level, as like a little girl with a sign that says God hates like the F word. And she ended up marrying one of them. But like just came to meet people who were different from her and slowly move out of this thing, and then had to, like leave her whole family and their whole lifestyle. She lost so much. All to say, she's a person who really at a mega level understands this thing of traveling from one side of thinking to a different side of thinking and trying to figure out who do I keep and how do I build a new thing, and what is the process of changing your mind? What is the process of actually really wrestling with information? Because I think that's kind of a key part of what we all need to be doing on either side of, do I want this person to be my friend, or should I be the one changing my mind about X topic? Like really, really wrestling with new information and figuring out how to let it in, but then how to synthesize it inside and be like, what, does this go somewhere? Like, this makes me uncomfortable, but is there a space for this within my value system? No, I'm actually going to put that information back out because I think it doesn't match my value system and the other things I know to be true. Or, oh no, it is actually challenging some of the stuff that I thought was obvious. Maybe I should let this information do its work inside because actually I might want to shift my position a little. Like, so this woman interviewed J.K. Rowling, but also lots of people all of the way around.
It was a really well done podcast. I thought it was, but for this, what we're talking about, what I got out of it is a lot of times when we don't see things the same way as the other person, the automatic end is we're on opposing sides. Like there's nowhere we can go with this. And her point is, but if you seek to understand and then you build enough trust that you can actually share your own perspective, like if you're so sure you're right, then why not invite them into what you have learned about the world that is so right? And really the only way to make any sort of headway on that would be to seek to understand, how does the world look from where you are over there? And we've said this in a previous podcast, but like where I'm sitting in the room looks one particular way. There's trees there. There's a tree over there. We've got window over there. The room looks different to Layne, where she's sitting. If we drew...
No trees, lamp, lots of
no
books,
window.
Bookshelf, heater.
Yes. If we were asked, draw the room you're in based on what you see, it would be different. We would draw two different perspectives and we're in the same room. So if I really want to convince Layne that actually the room has a window in it, it might be helpful that we talk some things through and I learn, what does the room look like from over there? And then she learns like, oh, wait, what? We're in the same room, but from where you're sitting, it looks like that. And I think growing up with lesbian moms in a society at that point that was not as warm as it is, and especially in a city that was not warm to homosexuality, I really feel like a gift I received in that is seeking to understand people, is like looking for the people who might not be understood, the ones who you're quick to make an assumption about. Being like, well, what's it like? What's it like to be you in there? Like you're probably doing the best you can with whatever you've got. And even if openly, like to other people, they're like, how could she be like this? Like, well, I don't know, ask her. Why are you the way you are? What does it feel like to be in your mind? What does it feel like to be in your body and in your room and in your relationships? And then you get further in there and then you go, oh, whoa, actually, if I were you, I might be like you. I don't know. I might be more like you if I were you. And then you can go somewhere with that. But something you said when the camera was off was about the idea that like you're sure of yourself. You're like, you're so sure things are obvious. Will you take us there a little bit?
Absolutely. We all look around this world and there are a big old set of things that seem so clear to us that we assume they're obvious. Like for me, there is not a window in the room that I can see. Obviously, I'm looking at it. There's no window over here, right? And it feels super clear and obvious to me. And it's kind of right. I'm right. Anybody who sits here and looks would go, no window. But the things that are obvious to me are not obvious to other people. So for example, the woman who's in your shop being like, how could this person want to vote for that other person when they're so whatever? All of these things that are obvious to this woman who is aghast are not necessarily obvious to the other person. She doesn't know what that person sees when that person is analyzing this candidate. That person may not have even heard of the things that make this person so horrible to her, right? So I walked around when I moved away from home saying a bunch of stuff and then occasionally kind of bumping into people. I would say a thing that was super obvious to me. And then people would be like, oh, no, I don't think that's true. And then they would say a different thing. And I'd be like, oh no, wait, what do you mean? And I have a whole list of these things happening as soon as I moved away from home and just was like in a different place with different people being like, wait a second. This is the ground. Like, this is the floor, right? Things are obvious. You should do things in this way. This is how a household should be structured. This is how people should treat each other. This is how children should treat their parents. This is how husbands and wives should function. This is like the role of this kind of person in society. This is what that institution is meant to do for us, right? These are how leaders should be. Like, we all have thoughts about those things. I say that list, and each of us has our own ideas immediately about like, obviously, or like, I hear a buzzword in what she's saying, and the obvious thing is that that's not real, you know? Like these things that come up, and you may examine all of your obvious things and feel like, actually, no, I have a well-constructed value system. Like, that's just efficient that it seems obvious to us. But if we've never thought about it before, and we haven't considered that our thoughts are our perspective, they are not reality. I am sitting in a different place from you. And I did come up through a totally different set of experiences from you. And the truth is that probably if I was born with your genetic makeup in your life experiences with your adults and I walked through life the way that you have, I would be you, right? Like, you're made out of what you came here with, what you got coming out, and then what you experienced and the interplay between those two things. And, your own little soul. But if I was you, I'd be you. And if you were me, you would be me.
And it would all be so obvious.
It would all be so obvious. So wanting to just hear that moment when that feeling comes up inside of like, why would they say something so obviously ridiculous? Why would they make a choice that's so obviously dangerous? Why, like, that voice of like harsh judgment of like, what a fool is kind of the undertone there. That's something I want to flag for us because I think that's really important. It's an important thing just as an adult to hear inside yourself. Like, when am I just bumping up against one of my assumptions? They're actually even biases, frankly, these things that they're so baked in that we don't see them. So trying to get a little bit of an eye on what we have inside that seems so clear and so obvious to us, just so that we know, like, oh, this person's coming up against one of my, like, it feels inherent, but like, this is a structure that got built in here. And again, you may want to keep those. There are some things in life that I've really thought about that now seem really obvious to me that I mean it about that stuff.
Of course. And it's not that we're saying things can't be obvious to you. Great. That's actually really helpful. If you have such an established value system that it's obvious, it's beautiful. That really kind of provides like a North Star for how you live your life and where you go and what you do. It's just more the humility to be able to say, this feels really obvious for me for lots of good reasons. And if it's not obvious to you, I'm not going to assume you're a dummy. I'm not going to assume that you know what's true and you're just doing it wrong. I'm going to assume that I don't know you well enough to understand why you see things the way you see. And if the relationship matters enough, I would like to get to know you. Now, you don't have the bandwidth to get to know everybody who thinks differently from you, and you shouldn't, and please don't. But if there are certain key people in your life that are worth having a relationship with, this could be family, this could be friends, this could be maybe a few specific coworkers that mean something to you, then get to know them and find out at least enough that you can keep that humility alive in you. And not be the type of person who like talks badly about somebody just because they see the world differently from you.
Or in your heart turns to hate them or turns them into your enemy immediately.
That's good.
Which is that's heavy language.
Sure.
But that's what it feels like inside. That's what it feels like, honestly. I feel like, oh, you've identified yourself now as my enemy. Absolutely. And some of this is checking on how much our own identity is built around like in-group status. You know, like, no, I'm a person who is. I'm an anti-vax co-sleeper who believe, you know, like whatever it is. Like we build groups. This is very natural to humanity. Like, this is how our species organizes itself. But we're at a point where we can actually think that through and like have the impulse to want to identify with our group. And for the most part, go ahead. But also know that actually that's not who I am. I'm just a person. I'm making certain choices based off of my information, but I'm not this group or that group, which actually means that other people are not me or not me.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's super tricky about identifying with your family or your close friends group or people who have the same face structure as you or people who make the same choices about education or whatever that thing is that it's really easy to pack those people in as your identity. And then if one of them changes or you find out a thing about them that's either not true about you or that you're scared of, it's suddenly like, oh no, I have to get that thing out of myself, or I feel so betrayed because I thought we were the same.
Yeah.
So really questioning those assumptions of sameness or what it means to be safe, right? So much of this feels so dangerous and only a little bit of it is, you know?
But the thing that you're describing, by talking to people, by understanding one another, because otherwise it's just blanket statements. I believe this. I believe this. How dare you believe that?
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
And so, you get to the underlying stuff and you find out everybody has super meaningful reasons for why they're trying to do what they're trying to do. Or they just don't have information and they would love to know. Generally speaking, if they're well-meaning parents, they want to know what's going on in the group. I mean, at our shop, for example, we found out one little girl who's been coming has a peanut allergy. Leading up to that point, I'm pretty sure every single time I've hosted a meetup, somebody has had little snacks with peanut stuff in it.
Oh my gosh.
The time that we found out this little girl has an allergy, never again. No, everybody in the group is like, oh, no way. We'll do whatever we need to do to protect this little child. Thank you for telling us. And it took courage actually to be the one who was like, I'm sorry that I have to tell you this, but this is the situation and I'm new here. And it's amazing how quickly all of these wonderful, well-meaning women want to protect a little person that they just met.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of sharing enough of your life with each other that you can know, like, so what is this? Because it's not like everyone in the group doesn't eat peanuts. It's just when they get there, they protect somebody.
Yeah.
And so in conversation, you find out, what does it look like to know you? What does it look like to protect you?
Yeah.
And then it directs the way you make your choices.
Yeah. It comes down to knowing for yourself which differences just feel conceptually threatening to you and which differences are really, really important in your life.
Endangering.
And that's going to help you know which people are allowed to be different from you and close and which people is it going to not work for your life to have them that close? Because actually this is one of my ones that is, I'm going to hold this in our life. Not just every viewpoint that I have about everything has to be protected equally.
Totally.
Right? Ranking that for yourself inside is going to bring you a level of peace, and it's going to make it a lot clearer as you look out over just the sea of beautiful people who could be really bosom close to you because, wow, it's so lovely to just totally connect with someone who can be a little close, but you guys are going to avoid these things, and who it's like, actually, I think this isn't going to work for us.
Well, and also, I have a friend whose son has cancer, and it didn't become about anybody's parenting. It wasn't like, are you a good mom or bad mom because you vaccinate or you don't? It was just, hey, if you guys are not sick and you got these things done in your life, these vaccines, these whatever, we're going to have a playtime over here. I love you. You can't be there if not, so no problem. It was never a question of, are you a good mom? Are you a good, smart woman? No, it's just, here's the situation we're in. And if you want to be here and be playing with us, here's what I need. And if you can't do that, that's no problem. And that also takes the like sting out of it, where it's not a question of, are these people good, smart, or are they our enemies?
Right.
It's just, this is how I protect my family. Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
And you just know.
That is going to be tricky around this election cycle, I want to say.
Sure.
Because both sides, if we want to say both sides, I mean, it's like, it's more of arcs, right? It's like, it's almost more like we're a circle that's cut down the middle. And there's a whole spectrum of ways to be, and they actually come really close to each other on the left and on the right in weird spots, but you got pretty much two options here. And on either end of that thinking, the other person feels like they're attacking your way of life.
Sure.
It's being positioned to us, and we're being spoken to as though the fact is that each of our ways of life are under threat from this other person. And it feels really tricky right now. I feel this in a really hard way. There are a bunch of people I love who are going to make a choice that I think really threatens some of my fundamental freedoms as a human person.
Okay.
Those people think that the choice that I'm going to make is an incredible attack on their way of life.
Yeah.
And so I just want us to
so
know
important.
that this this having a difference of those two things, if you're someone who's highly engaged and bought into one or the other of these ideas, it does feel right now extra like people who are making the opposite choice from you are your enemy and are attacking you.
Yeah.
I don't really have an answer about that except to really bring it to the center and shine a light on it so that it's something that hopefully we can regulate around in ourselves when we feel that feeling come up.
Yeah, I don't either. I think I watched my husband's family do this. They are very close. In the last election, ended up on different pages from each other, but they're very close family. So it's my husband, and then he's got brothers, and they're amazing. Like they're really, really great, and they're smart, and they love each other so much, but they're honest. And so I watched multiple times conversation around a table of like, but what about this? But how could you think of this? And there would be emotions. I mean, there would be big feelings. And I mean, but at the end of the day, they voted how they voted. And they still had family dinners together, and they still love each other very much. And it was hard. I mean, it's not like it was all really nice. I think for each of them, because of exactly what you're describing, because it feels like, but this is our future. It's that, and then it's also like, and we are each other's family. And it's at the end of the day, we will continue our pursuit of relationship with one another because that is who we are, and because I love you for a million different reasons. And this thing, very intense. This thing gonna be intense. And for them, they are like debaters. Like they all debate. I mean, they get together and like debate the Bible for hours. And sometimes I'm like, all right, guys. And I feel like they're kind of comfortable with like disagreeing with each other and then making jokes and playing a board game, and they're like, good. Not everybody's like that. But just, I think they leaned very heavily into their commitment to each other. And like, that is stronger than a bunch of these teary-eyed, loud conversations where we really don't agree with each other. And it's a real mega bummer. And so that helps. It's harder when you have super dysfunction in the family already. So you're like, I don't even know how committed I am to you guys. Right. And now we don't see eye to eye. And I think you're allowed to have space from people. It's just, what I'm getting at is a process before taking space, like the finding out you see the world differently and then being like, oh, we can never exist in the same place. Right. We can never have a relationship without any of the in-between of this like beautiful building trust, letting them get to know you, letting them find out that Layne, as grown-up Layne, who has shifted her belief system and actually is totally different than she was 10 years ago, is still a really wonderful, lovely, smart, fabulous Layne. Yeah. And then inside of that, if ever it opens up for you guys to have conversations around it, there's still so much connectedness that it's like, oh, wow, okay, so we're basically, then you see what you're throwing away. If you're going to end the relationship, you're seeing like, oh, the cost is, you're losing something special. Yeah. Versus like
it burns down my enemy.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I lost that precious person.
Yes. And it's different if it's just, there's someone that I met and I don't know them very well, and they said they believe this thing, and I didn't really like them that much anyway. Yeah. And so that's fine. Okay. But yeah, I guess where we are coming from in this episode is just more like, if the relationship matters, then do some of the harder work to build in connectedness and understanding. And what you might even do is change their mind. The most effective way of changing somebody's mind is going to be to understand what they see and then bring them over and be like, so this is what I see. And you really might change their mind. That happens all the time. People believe what they believe because somebody helped lead them there. Yeah. And so, I think if you need to take space from a person, if you, for example, hypothetically, if you have some meaningful conversations, Layne, with people who you love, and it gets really ugly, and you're like, oh, wow, I'm going to go back to my city a few hours from you, and I'm going to take some time. And you might hear from me in a few months, right? Nobody's going to think that that was unfair. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah. But you're doing stuff ahead of time. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. I have only two more thoughts. Okay. One of them is, this is just my personal belief, I actually think the only way to change your mind as a person is exposure to people who are different from you, whether that's your own mind that could change. And I would encourage you to not be afraid. Right? You have a mind that's trustworthy, and actually you may find that you want to change things. You may come into better information or a more clear argument, and your values might shift. And this other person that you love, if they are hearing only their information, like resounding in just a little echo chamber forever and ever and ever, there is no other way of them getting out of that space than exposure to someone who thinks or lives or is different from them.
Yeah.
And so I just think that like sunlight and exposure is the major change agent, in relationship. And if you're going to speak to someone who does think differently from you, whether you would like to introduce a topic that could be challenging and you want to get into it together, or whether you're going to tell them, hey, I love you so much, I don't want us to talk about this ever again.
Right. Yeah.
I learned a big thing about transitional sentences. You have to actually say the part that seems implied to you, like, hey, I want to bring up something really tricky, and I just want to start by saying that, like, I love you, and I think you're smart, and I think you're a really good mom. We're a little different in this one space, and I just wanted to address that together. But saying, I love you, I think you're smart, I don't think you're a person who's dumb, I don't think you're a bad, like, that, padding that at the front there, which is not just like random compliment, but it's like, what could this person walk away from this thinking? Like, what would ruin this really relationship? Good. Okay, I want to make sure that I state the opposite of that thing in order to roll us into this, because it's not always obvious. And another person whom you love and think is smart really might think that what you're saying is that you don't love them and you think they're bad and dumb.
Right.
And so like say that part before you go into this, just to make it clear.
Yeah, to make it so obvious. That's so good. Yeah. Well, the irony too is if we're talking about election, you actually would benefit from more people agreeing with whatever you agree with whatever your thinking is if voting matters. So it doesn't do the most good to just hate everybody who thinks differently from you because like logistically it would be helpful. It would be helpful.
Just a matter of math, electoral math.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, it's like on some stuff you can be like, I can't believe they whatever. But when it comes to something that involves a vote, like, why not have meaningful conversation? If you're so passionate, you're ready to burn down relationships, maybe use that passion to like have a meaningful conversation.
Or perhaps you're not actually that passionate about it. And perhaps you could just bring down the temperature, vote how you'd like to vote, and move on.
That is exactly my point. Thank you so much. Yeah, wow, great. I think so. Wonderful. Yeah, I would love if you guys have any thoughts, input, like anything you've seen in your own life that you want to leave in the comments. Or email us,
verygoodenoughpod@gmail.com.
It's like the most obvious email address, and I always forget. I'm like, email us. Just
it's in the words below wherever they're watching or listening. So just scroll down a little bit.
Exactly. Or like whenever there's a little thing posted on Instagram, you can always comment there too. What I love about people commenting public places is it becomes a resource for other people looking. So anything you have to say, if you want your voice to be heard, let it be heard. We would love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
And thanks so much for everything. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Very Good Enough is a production of Very Good Mothers Club. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a second to rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and leave a little comment. And above all, text it to a friend.